Hi and welcome to my presentation. Today we're going to be looking at learning in physical education and sports coaching from Aristotle 2. So today we're mainly focusing on learning theories. There are a very big variety of them because different researchers have come up with different ideas. However, I'm going to focus on four main ones which I'll explain to you later on in the presentation. So the objectives for my session: it will be describe a learning theory using the journalistic questions who, what, where, when and how. It's understand the four learning theories in the context of the different disciplines, identify the importance of the learning theories, and then apply these learning theories into a sports coaching context. So exploring what learning is allows for a better understanding of the learning theories. Pritchard described learning as a change in behaviour as a result of practice over a period of time. Most definitions of learning are found in learning theories as it makes sense of the process. Learning theories are basically frameworks that describe how knowledge is absorbed, processed, and then also understood and retained. So to begin with, we're going to look at the learning domains. Three of these have been identified, which are cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. The cognitive domain highlights an individual's thinking process, so how they understand and what they do with the information they are given. This is then ordered, as you can see by the pyramids, into a hierarchy of whereabouts in the pyramid it comes. So you've got the lower order intellectual skills and then the higher order intellectual skills. I'll come back to this later on in the presentation when I'm talking about one of the learning theories. So the affective domain is the emotional domain, and it's how you sort of respond and understand and then what you do with the information you're given. Krathwohl suggests that the different objectives can be separated into a hierarchy. So again, it starts at a lower level and then works up to the higher level. So the receiving the information is, are you in the right attitude to sort of listen and engage with the information that's being presented to you? So responding is what you then do once you've gathered this information. Valuing is whether you believe it's true or whether you think, well, actually, I don't believe that's true and I have my own opinion of it. Organising the information is where you put it into your own sort of hierarchy. So you might find something, for example, in netball, you might think pivoting is, and knowing the bases around that, is at the top of the most valuable piece of information you need, whereas how to throw a ball, you think you don't need to know that, you can just throw it anyway. And then categorising is how you sort of use this information to influence your discipline and the work that you produce. So the psychomotor domain is also known as the kinesthetic domain. It's specific to the physical functions and looks at how you encode the information and then sort of transfer that into your movements. So reflex movements are movements that you do involuntary. For example, if you put your hand over a burning flame, you instantly remove your hand without thinking about it, and that's involuntary because it's sort of what you do without even thinking about it. The fundamental movements are sort of the basic movements that you sort of learn from a young age, so that could be walking, jumping, running and jogging and sorts of those. Perceptual abilities is how you move according to the environment. So for example, you could be inside on a smooth ground, whereas then you could go outside for a run and it'd be really rough and bumpy ground, so then you have to change how you're moving in order to sort of make yourself move better on the different ground surfaces. The physical abilities is how you, your strength, your endurance and your flexibility. Skilled movements are skills that you need specifically for your sport. And non-discursive communication is your facial expressions, but also what's your body position like whilst you're sort of looking at how people are doing their movements, but also before you've done the movement, during your movement and after the movement. So the first learning theory we come to is behaviourism. This is how an individual reacts and responds to the environment. Pavlov did an investigation with dogs and looked at how they respond when they are conditioned. He believed humans could be conditioned exactly the same way to react as a stimulus as the dogs could. So reactions are created using the reflex response. Classical conditioning is a natural reflex caused by stimulus, whereas operant conditioning occurs when a response is forced. So for Pavlov's experiment for the dogs, he used food as the unconditional stimulus. So when the dogs saw the food, they automatically started salivating. However, then he started using the bell, which then caused them to salivate, as he used to add the bell with the food. So once the dogs heard the bell sound, they knew that food was on the way, so they'd start salivating. So once he did them both at the same time, it also again caused salivation. Cognitivism is, research argues that it's more important from the environment. Bandura suggested that models who have authority and power can sometimes be copied or imitated. So Bloom's taxonomy looks at this. Like I said before, you have the lower order intellectual skills, and then the higher ones, the more you go up the pyramids. So to begin with, he started with knowledge at the bottom. Knowledge is a very broad term, and different researchers have come up with different forms of knowledge. But for the purpose of Bloom's taxonomy, he came up with originally it was 3 different forms, and then another one was added later. So to begin with, there was factual knowledge. So that is the basic facts and figures that you need to understand a discipline. Next came the conceptual, so that's adding learning theories and different research in order to influence your work. And the final one was procedural, which is information that are given to students in order for them to go off and complete a task. And then metacognition was added at a later date, which looks at how the person thinks about the information and then how they use it. Next up on these skills is the comprehension. So that is how you construct an understanding from the given information. Then is application. So how can you apply this new information you have learnt to skills or a discipline that you're currently training in. Next is analysis. So this is breaking down the information into bits and pieces and then sort of looking at what it's actually trying to say to you. Then comes the synthesis, which is putting parts together to form a coherent. So you could find 2 different areas which you think link together and then bring that together as one. And then is evaluation, so that's how you judge and then sort of check and critique this new information and all the ideas you've come up with. Later on, this was sort of looked at again by Anderson and Catherall, and they redesigned it because they believed that it wasn't 100% true. So they sort of narrowed the categories down a bit. So instead of knowledge, they decided remember. So it's what information that can you recall that you've already learned. Then is the understanding. So how much do you actually know about this information? Have you done any extra research around the area? Then is applying, which is similar to the application. So it's how can you use this information in your discipline? Again, you're analysing it, which is breaking it down again and looking at the different sections. But here's where the main difference is. They decided that you evaluate before you do, after that, your analysis before you do anything else. So evaluating is looking at the information and judging it, checking it, making sure everything's okay and what you like about it and what you don't like. Then is creating, so then now you've got all your information and you've evaluated it, how can you create something new or alter something with all of this information? So the next learning theory is constructivist. This is how individuals construct their own understanding and knowledge of the environment through experiences and then reflect on them later in life. So this was also broken down into cognitive and social. However, as you can see by the diagram, they sort of link together and form one thing. Originally, Piaget did an experiment on water snails and how this affected them before he actually looked at humans himself. So this is how the cognitive and social constructivism works. So cognitive is in 4 development stages, and it suggests learners understand in the different stages through the different years. And then the social side proposes understanding develops from social encounters. So that's mainly young learners, and also about experienced learners, but also which are then influenced by the culture that they're brought up in. So people might have different experiences. The zone of proximal development is the difference between what you can do alone and what you can do with help. So right in the centre of the diagram is what the learner can do alone. So this is with no help from anyone, it's them going out and finding out stuff by themselves. The next is what the learner can do with help. So this is getting information from people, books, and all sorts of different areas. And then next, the last circle is what the learner cannot do. So they've tried something, they can't do it on their own, they've tried help, but they're not getting anywhere, so it's just not working. And that was by Vygotsky. So the social theories of learning. Social learning is learning from the environment and everyday experiences. Bandura did an experiment which showed learning can occur through observation and imitating someone else. So I'm just going to show you this clip if it works. There we go. So in this experiment, Bandura had a woman stood there beating up this inflatable clown. In the background, there's a child watching her do this, and sort of he was observing what she was doing, but he didn't understand why she was doing it. And so later on, they left the child alone in the room with the clown, but he also had toys with him in the background. And instead of playing with the toys and whatever, he decided to sort of copy the lady because of what he'd seen and start beating up the clown. So originally he just used his fists and was pushing it around. But as you can see, eventually he picks up the little hammer that the lady used and starts beating it up with the hammer. And then it gets even more interesting because later on he finds a toy gun in the room and starts pretending to shoot the clown with this toy gun. And I'll let you watch the rest of it. So this is where he finds the toy gun. And the child was never told to do anything, do this. He was just left in the room on his own to play with these toys. So this experiment shows how he has learned something through observation, but also by imitating and copying somebody else. So then they also used another child, but this time they used a girl instead of a boy to see if she did the exact same thing, and she did. As you can see, she seemed to get bored of it quite quickly. She'd throw it around a lot more, however, she wasn't as violent. She didn't pick up the tool to start hitting it, and she didn't pick up the toy gun, which was also in the room. So modelling is when an individual is watched on how to complete a task, and then that is seen as an example, and then somebody else then goes on and uses it themselves. So that little triangle is from Bandura's theory, and it just shows how he believes everything links. So you observe a behaviour which is influenced by different environmental factors, and then the personal factors, and then that changes your behaviour again. So it's a cycle that keeps going round depending on where you are, who you're with, and what you have available to you. Okay, so now we're going to look at this in the context of sports coaching. So in a group, we're going to come up with an example of how each of the 4 learning theories can be used in different sports. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So if we go back to the behaviourism, so here for netball, the unconditioned stimulus would be running and just catching a ball. The conditioning stimulus would be hearing the whistle blow and knowing play is about to stop, which the conditioned response would be stopping. Okay, does that make sense to you all there? So using any of these, I'd like you to try and come up with different ideas for your sports. If you want me to put any slides back on, just let me know. Do you want any particular slide back up, or? So if you use the conditioned stimulus and response one, so for example football, I know I use the whistle for netball, but think about other things that happen in a game which influence play. So I'll give you another example. Someone could get an injury and then be lying down on the pitch, and then, yeah, or throw-ins, or there's ways the game are manipulated.
Just do boxing, it's easier. It's easier. Stop it in boxing. They slapped up, your hands are down, hands down. Okay. You don't know how to I'm moving on my way. And it goes back. What's up? Boxing. Yeah, man. Table. I think that's behaviour.
If that's what you think, you write it down. Okay, I'm going to challenge you, Noah. Can you think of a way that you sort of use that pyramid in squash, because I know that's your sport, so the way, what influences you to have to start sort of thinking about all this information that you're getting? So it could be positioning of players, or where the ball's going and stuff like that. So say in a game of squash, for example, so the player could be stood at right at the front of the court, so you're more likely to play it to the back, am I right? Yeah. So that would be an example that you could write down there. So you'd have to think about sort of getting knowledge, yeah, sort of tactics in a way, yeah. Cognitism, so that's sort of your thinking process essentially. So me and Noah just came up one with for squash, because we're trying to get different sports. So for example, a player could be stood at the front of the court, so then you've sort of observed that information, you've taken it in, so then you're more likely to play the ball towards the back of the court, because they're less likely to get it there. Yeah.
One front bit, like, spin it, like, if a lot of players, like, they'll see someone spinning the ball, and they'll automatically think you've got to spin it like.
Yeah, so start copying, yeah.
But like that can't be like, is that not necessarily like a good situation, or is it both good and bad? So if you see a bad habit, you can
yeah.
pick it up.
So it's got its positives and negatives, so yeah.
No one's reading that song. It's right here. I don't know, can't remember what it's got. It's right here. It's right here. What's that? The learning theory. O-R-I-E-S. Yeah, just copy that, isn't it? Like Morgan see the correct and copy it.
Dave, I think if you're ever feeling ill, you have like a
Okay, so no one needs to write a squash one down when you've finished with that one, Morgan.
I gave a box earlier.
I didn't use boxing.
No, Morgan wrote the box.
I wrote it from my own personal experience.
Can you think of one for the constructivist? So how, well, it's on the board there, so how you construct your own knowledge from the environment and then sort of reflect on that experience from later.
Can you do an example of that?
So for example, say it's your first game on the pitch, and, okay, go on.
I thought when raining, the ball skids straight down.
Yeah, so you could have played your first game, it was a nice sunny day, but then your next game, the ground's wet, and that changes how you're going to play.
It's too far. So yeah.
It's the one that you told me.
Yeah, the way where Merrick great plan like that.
You're literally a scumbag.
That's me.
Just
What,
a
should we even
scumbag.
win again? Yeah, it's all free.
So do you feel like you've got sort of an example from each of the learning theories now?
I know.
It's just dots.
I know.
It's like, it's just not in it.
So people think I've done one.
It's like, Morse code.
It is. What is it? You said something like
X2.
helping 641. Yo, you had me really confused. This. Said Joe Rogan. Didn't come up to me.
Joe, can I ask? Can I ask what have you just written down on there?
Also for the cognitive one, once you first started, when you catching the ball in the dry weather, like you say in the next game, it's chucking it down. You've got to then adjust to catch it in the wet weather.
Yeah, that's great. So to sort of summarise what we've and sort of give you a little bit more information, young and vulnerable people need the knowledge and skills in order to function in society. So if they don't have this, they're going to struggle to sort of communicate with people, but also get involved with things that are going on. Learning theories are complex models that overlap and form the foundations for teaching and coaching. So these learning theories are looked at and they sort of assess the class they've got and figure out what's the best way to sort of teach something, but also how they respond in to the information. And also knowing about the different techniques to learning is essential to ensure young and vulnerable people have the best learning experiences. And that's my references.